My name is Georgia Hollis. I'm 31 years old and I'm a tax attorney in Charleston, South Carolina. 4 weeks ago, I received a printed program in the mail. Heavy cream cardstock, gold foil border, my own photograph centered above my full name and the dates of my life. The date of my death was listed as the Saturday before. The reception would be held at Magnolia Bluff Country Club at 2 o'clock the following Saturday. Hors d'oeuvres and a cash bar. My mother had signed the bottom, "In loving memory of the daughter we lost." I was, as far as I knew, still alive. I didn't call my mother. I didn't cry. I set the program down on my kitchen counter, walked to the corner of my office, and pulled a manila folder out of the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Inside the folder was a 36-page document my grandmother had signed 11 months before she died, a codicil to her will, an irrevocable testamentary trust, my name on every signature line. That program was supposed to erase me. My mother thought she was burying a daughter who had nothing. She didn't know that 3 months earlier, I had become the sole trustee and the sole beneficiary of the Hollis family estate. The house she lived in, the lake property she bragged about, the membership she was throwing my funeral at. Before I tell you what was on page 27 of that codicil, please take a moment to like and subscribe if this story is pulling you in. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. And if you've ever been written out of a family by people who didn't check what the paperwork said, stay with me. Let me take you back to the beginning. My grandmother was named Eleanor Hollis. Everyone called her Nell. She was the one who taught me to read a contract before I signed it. She was the one who paid for law school when my father refused. She was the one who at 78 still drove herself to the Piggly Wiggly in a 1998 Cadillac Seville because she said new cars felt like rental cars all the way down. My father is Richard Hollis. He's 64. He was Nell's only son. He worked for 41 years at a regional insurance brokerage and retired 6 years ago with a decent pension and a bigger opinion of himself than anyone else had. My mother is Patricia. She's 61. She spent the last 30 years telling anyone who would listen that she was the Hollis of the Charleston Hollises, which was a stretch because she had married into the name, and the name wasn't actually that important in Charleston. My older sister is Whitney. She's 34. She was, as my mother never stopped saying, the pretty one. I was the other one. I don't remember a time when I wasn't being measured against Whitney. When I was 7 and Whitney was 10, my mother bought her ballet lessons at the studio on Broad Street. I asked if I could go too. My mother looked me up and down and said I had my father's shoulders. Whitney took ballet for 11 years. I took piano lessons at the church because they were free. When I was 15, I made National Merit finalist. My mother said it was nice. Whitney had just gotten engaged to a boy from a family that owned 3 car dealerships. My mother threw a party. 300 people. Whitney was 18. The engagement was broken off 9 months later. There was no party for the National Merit. When I got into Duke, my father told me I should go to College of Charleston instead because it was cheaper and I could live at home. When I told him I'd gotten a scholarship that covered 2/3 of Duke, he said scholarships weren't guaranteed past freshman year. When I told him I was going anyway, he said I shouldn't expect help from him if it didn't work out. I said I wouldn't. My grandmother wrote me a check the next day for the remaining third and told me not to tell my parents. That check was the first time I understood that my grandmother was keeping her own books. Whitney had by this point burned through cosmetology school, a real estate license, 2 jobs at her husband's father's dealership, and most of the patience of the women who kept getting stuck with her on committees. She was beautiful. She could cry on cue. My mother called her resilient. My father called her spirited. Anyone outside the family called her exhausting, but only after several drinks. I graduated Duke magna cum laude. I took the LSAT once, scored a 172, and went to UVA Law on a partial. My grandmother covered the rest. I passed the South Carolina bar the summer after graduation and took a job at Whitmore & Price, a mid-sized firm on East Bay that specializes in tax and estate work. I made senior associate in 4 years. I'm on track for partner next spring. None of that impressed my parents. What impressed my parents was that Whitney's second husband, a contractor named Drew, had just bought a boat. My grandmother died on a Wednesday in January. She was 83. She had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer the previous May and had 8 months of decline that she insisted on doing at home, in her own bed, with a hospice nurse named Denise and a rotating cast of church ladies bringing casseroles no one ate. I drove up to her house in Somerville every Friday after work. I'd sit with her from 6 o'clock until she fell asleep around 9. My parents came once in the last 4 months. Whitney came never. My grandmother's attorney was a man named Brett Holloway. He's 67, silver-haired, wears bow ties on Wednesdays, and has been practicing trust and estate law in Charleston for 42 years. He and my grandmother had worked together since 1983. Brett called me the Monday after the funeral. He asked if I could come to his office on Meeting Street that Friday at 4 o'clock. He asked me to come alone. He said my parents and Whitney had already been contacted separately and had already received their letters. I sat in his office on a Friday afternoon in a wing-back chair that smelled faintly of leather conditioner and pipe tobacco from an era before anyone smoked in offices anymore. Brett set a manila folder on the desk between us. He opened it. He turned the first page toward me. The top of the page said, "Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Margaret Hollis." The second page was a codicil executed in February of the previous year. The date was 11 months before her death. Brett said, "Georgia, your grandmother did something unusual 11 months ago. She rewrote the entire disposition of the estate. I want to walk you through it slowly because there are a few things you need to understand about what this means." I counted. 8 seconds of silence. Something in my chest tightened. He turned to page 3. Page 3 was a list of assets. The principal residence at 418 Live Oak Road, Somerville. The lake property on Lake Marion. The brokerage account at Raymond James. The money market account at South State Bank. The 2 life insurance policies. The 1998 Cadillac Seville. Total estimated value, as of the date of the codicil, $4.2 million. Page 4 was the disposition. The entire estate, every asset, every dollar, every square foot of real property was placed into an irrevocable trust. The trustee was named on page 4, line 12. The sole beneficiary was named on page 4, line 14. Both names were mine. My parents received nothing. Whitney received nothing. A handwritten letter in Nell's handwriting was attached as Exhibit A. It was 6 sentences long. I will not read it to you here. I will tell you only that it used the phrase, "the one who sat with me on Fridays." Brett said, "Georgia, I have been an estate attorney for 42 years. I have never seen a client write a codicil this clean. Your grandmother and I went through every paragraph. She wanted it airtight. She knew your parents would try to break it." I said, "How airtight?" He said, "Irrevocable. In terrorem clause on any challenger. They forfeit anything they might have received, which is nothing. So the clause is mostly symbolic, but it sends a message. Your grandmother also pre-funded the trust during her lifetime through 3 separate transfers. The statutes of limitations to contest those transfers ran out 61 days before she died. Your parents can file a lawsuit tomorrow. It will be dismissed within 90 days. I am telling you this because I need you to understand. There is no legal path for them. None." I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I folded the paper back into the manila folder. I set the folder on my lap. I looked at Brett and I said, "Do my parents know about the codicil?" Brett said, "Their letters went out on Monday. They will have received them today or tomorrow. The letters state that they are not beneficiaries and that the estate has passed entirely to you. The letters do not specify the dollar amount. I thought you should be the one to decide when to disclose that." I said, "Have you heard from them?" He said, "Your father called this morning. He used language I will not repeat in this office. He demanded to see the original document. I told him he is welcome to come review it during business hours with his own attorney present. He has not yet scheduled an appointment." I said, "Thank you, Brett." He said, "Georgia, one more thing. Your grandmother asked me to give you a message. She asked me to tell you that she knew what they were going to do. She said you should not be surprised by anything that comes next. She said you should handle it the way she would have handled it." I said, "Which is?" He smiled. He said, calmly, "With paperwork." I drove home that night with the folder on the passenger seat. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Whitney. I didn't tell anyone. I made dinner. I ate it at my kitchen table with the folder still closed next to my plate. I washed 1 plate, 1 fork, 1 glass. I put the folder in the bottom drawer of my office filing cabinet under a divider labeled "Personal. Do not touch." I had 3 things to figure out. I had to decide whether I was going to sell the assets, keep them, or restructure them into something productive. I had to decide how I was going to communicate with my family. And I had to decide what I was going to do when they came for me, because they were going to come for me. I knew it the way you know a storm is coming from the way the trees go still. I made a spreadsheet. I'm a tax attorney. Spreadsheets are how I think. Column 1, asset. Column 2, current market value. Column 3, cost basis. Column 4, tax consequences of sale. Column 5, tax consequences of retention. Column 6, emotional weight. That last column was a joke I made to myself because lawyers aren't supposed to put feelings in spreadsheets, but I put it in anyway. The lake house had an emotional weight of 0. My grandmother had barely used it in the last 10 years. My mother had used it as a bragging point at every Charleston social event she could crash. The principal residence had an emotional weight of 10. It was where my grandmother had lived for 46 years. It was where she had taught me to read. It was where she had told me, 2 weeks before she died, that I was the only person in the family who had ever actually listened to her. I wasn't going to sell that house. I was going to live in it. The rest of the column, 4 numbers added up to a trust corpus of approximately $3.8 million after expected taxes and administrative expenses. Even if the principal residence was held out as my personal residence and not an income-generating asset, I would have a trust generating at a conservative 5% about $190,000 a year in passive income for life. I looked at the spreadsheet for a long time. Then I saved it. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. I had not yet heard from my parents. 3 weeks would pass before I did. The first contact came on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after I left Brett's office. My phone lit up on the counter while I was browning onions for a pot of chili. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. She called back 40 seconds later. I let it go to voicemail again. This time, she left a message. The message was 54 seconds long. I listened to it twice. In the first 15 seconds, she said she needed to speak with me immediately. In the next 15 seconds, she said there had been a terrible misunderstanding involving Grandma Nell's attorney. In the next 15 seconds, she said that obviously my father, as Nell's only son, was the rightful heir. In the final 9 seconds, she said, and I'm quoting exactly, "Georgia, we both know you don't know how to handle that kind of money. Your father and I are going to help you do the right thing." I set the wooden spoon down on the stovetop rest. I watched the onions go translucent. I did not call her back. 40 minutes later, my father called, then Whitney, then my father again, then my mother. By 10 o'clock that night, there were 17 missed calls, 6 voicemails, and 23 text messages. By the next morning, there were 41 text messages, including one from Whitney that said, in all lowercase letters, "You selfish bitch, you stole from our own parents." I read them all in the order they came in. I took screenshots. I filed the screenshots in a folder on my desktop labeled Correspondence, January 28th, forward. I responded to none of them. On Thursday morning, I called Brett Holloway. I told him my family had made contact. I told him what had been said. I asked what my obligations were. He said, "Georgia, you have no legal obligation to respond to any of them. You have a fiduciary duty as trustee to the trust's sole beneficiary, which is yourself. And you have no duty of communication to your parents or your sister. If they send correspondence that could be construed as legal threats, send it to me and I'll respond on your behalf." I said, "What if they try to come to the house?" He said, "Which house?" I said, "Mine or Nell's." He said, "Nell's house is legally yours as of the recording of the trust instrument, which happened on the 13th. You have every right to be there, and they have no right to be. If they attempt to enter the property, you are within your rights to call the police. I would also suggest changing the locks this week if you haven't already." I said, "I changed them on the 20th. He said, "Good girl." I smiled for the first time in 3 weeks. The next contact was a letter. It arrived on Monday, handwritten on my mother's personal stationery, the kind with her monogram embossed at the top in pale blue ink. 3 pages. The first page was an appeal to family. We had all grieved Nell. We were all hurting. We needed to be together in this difficult time. A family is not a transaction. A family is a covenant. The second page was an appeal to fairness. My father had spent his whole life being Nell's son. He had made sacrifices. He had given up career opportunities to stay close. He deserved, those were her words, he deserved a meaningful portion of his own mother's estate. Whitney deserved the same. My mother acknowledged that I had been close with Nell at the end, and she was sure Nell had appreciated it. But the end is not the whole life. The whole life was what mattered. The third page was an ultimatum. If I did not, by the end of the month, agree to restructure the trust so that my father received half and Whitney and I split the remaining half equally, she would be forced to take steps. She would not say what steps. She was sure I understood. I read the letter twice. I photocopied it. I sent the photocopy to Brett by certified mail. I put the original in the folder in my desk. I did not respond. I want to pause here for a second. If you've ever received a letter from a family member that was dressed up as love, but was really a loaded weapon, I see you. That specific kind of letter, the one written on nice stationery, in nice handwriting, full of nice words about family and sacrifice and covenant, is one of the most disorienting things a person can receive. Because if you respond to the words, you lose. And if you don't respond, you look cold. The trick is realizing the letter wasn't really asking a question. It was setting up a trap. The correct move is the move I made. Send it to your lawyer, file the original, and keep cooking your chili. If this story is hitting close to home, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, has anyone ever put you in a position where silence was the only honest answer? I want to hear what you did. And if you're curious what my mother meant by steps, keep watching, because the steps she took were worse than I expected and better for me than she could have possibly understood. I moved into my grandmother's house on the 4th of February. I did it on a Saturday. I rented a small U-Haul and I did it by myself. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. The locksmith had already come. The utilities had been transferred. I had cleaned out 3 closets worth of Nell's clothing the weekend before and donated everything to a church thrift shop in Somerville. I kept her wedding dress, a set of 4 Wedgwood teacups she had received from her own mother, and a cedar chest full of letters she had saved from my grandfather's time in Korea. I slept in the guest bedroom the first 2 weeks. I couldn't make myself sleep in her bed yet. On the second Friday in February, I got home from work at 7 o'clock, and there were 3 cars in the driveway. My father's Lincoln, my mother's Mercedes, and Whitney's Tahoe. All 3 of them were standing on the front porch. My mother was holding a bakery box. I parked in the street. I did not pull into the driveway. I walked up to the porch carrying my briefcase. My mother said, "Georgia, sweetheart, we thought we'd come see the house." I said, "Please get off the porch." Whitney said, "Are you serious right now?" My father said, "This is my mother's house. I grew up here." I said, "This is my house. I'm asking you to leave." My mother said, "Don't be dramatic. We're family. We brought cake." I said, "I'm going to count to 10. If you're not off the porch and in your cars by 10, I'm calling the Somerville police and I'm going to file a trespass report." 1. My father said, "Georgia, for God's sake." I said, 2. My mother set the bakery box down on the porch rail. She said, "You are making a terrible mistake." I said, 3. Whitney said, "Mom, let's just go. She's not worth it." I said, 4. They went. My father went slowest. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and said, "You're going to regret this, Georgia." I said, 5. He went. I picked up the bakery box. It was from a bakery on King Street that I had loved when I was a child, a lemon layer cake. I carried it inside and put it on the kitchen counter. I stood there for a long time, looking at it. Then I took the whole cake, box and all, and I put it in the trash bin outside. I walked back in. I washed my hands. I poured a glass of water. Day 1 of occupation. I counted. The next morning, I called Brett. I told him about the porch. He said, "Document it. Write down the date, the time, the duration, the quotes. If they come back, call the police the next time, not the time after." He paused. He said, "Georgia, I need to tell you something. I've been practicing long enough to recognize a pattern. When families realize they can't get at the money through the front door, they try to get at it through reputation. Be prepared for that. Don't engage." I said, "What do you mean, reputation?" He said, "Rumors, social circles, small cuts, lots of them. They can't take the money, but they can try to take your standing." I said, "Brett, I live in my grandmother's house in Somerville. I work in downtown Charleston. My social standing is a partnership track at a law firm where the senior partner personally vetted me in 2019. Whatever reputation they think they have the power to damage, they don't." He said, "I hope you're right, but they may try something I haven't thought of. They usually do." He was right, and I hadn't thought of it either. The next contact didn't come to me directly. It came to the senior partner at my firm. On the following Wednesday at 9:15 in the morning, the senior partner, a woman named Celia Whitmore, who is 68 and has been practicing estate law in Charleston since the Carter administration, called me into her office. She closed the door. She said, "Georgia, I received a phone call yesterday from a woman who identified herself as your mother. I also received this morning a letter signed by both your parents and your sister. I want to walk you through what they said." I sat down. I put both hands flat on the arms of the chair. I did not say anything. Celia said, "The phone call and the letter alleged that you had manipulated your grandmother in her final months of cognitive decline into rewriting her will to disinherit the rest of the family. They alleged that you had isolated her from the family. They alleged that you had used your position as a tax attorney and an estate specialist to draft documents your grandmother didn't understand. They are demanding that this firm investigate your conduct, and they are threatening to file a complaint with the South Carolina bar." I said nothing for a long moment. I said, "I see." Celia said, "Before you say anything, let me tell you what I'm going to do. I know Brett Holloway. I have known Brett since we were both in our 20s. I called him yesterday as soon as I got the phone call. Brett confirmed that he, and only he, drafted the codicil. He confirmed that your grandmother was evaluated for capacity by her internist and by an independent geriatric psychiatrist on separate dates within 60 days of the execution of the codicil. He confirmed that you were not present for any meeting between him and your grandmother during the drafting of the document. He also confirmed that he has a signed and notarized statement from your grandmother describing, in her own words, why she made the decision she did." I said, yes, that's all correct. Celia said, I am not conducting an investigation. There is no investigation to conduct. I am writing a letter to your parents and your sister on firm letterhead, stating that the firm has reviewed the allegations and found them to be without foundation. I am also sending a copy to Brett, who will respond on your behalf to any bar complaint they attempt to file. If they actually file one, Brett will move for sanctions. Do you understand? I said yes. Celia said, Georgia, I need to ask you one question, and I need you to answer honestly. Did you know your grandmother was going to leave the estate to you? I said no. I didn't know until Brett called me the Monday after the funeral. I found out from him in the same office where we're sitting right now, except his has better wallpaper. Celia did not smile. She said, good. That's what Brett said. That's what your grandmother's statement says. I believe you, but I needed to hear it from you. She stood up. She walked around the desk. She put her hand on my shoulder. She said, your grandmother knew what she was doing, and your family has just shown me exactly why she did it. Go back to work. I went back to work. That afternoon, I called Brett. I told him about Celia. I told him about the phone call and the letter. I said they went after my career. Brett said, they went after what they thought was the easiest soft target. They assumed your firm would panic and push you out. They didn't account for Celia knowing me. Small town. This is the advantage you have that they don't understand. The Charleston legal community is a village. They can't smear you here. Everyone will call me before they believe a word. I said, what do I do? Brett said, nothing. Let them keep sending letters. Let them keep making calls. Every time they make a move, it creates a paper trail that demonstrates their pattern. That paper trail will eventually matter. I said, when? He said, I don't know yet, but you will. When they overreach, you'll know. I went to work the next morning. I went to work every morning. I billed my hours. I took my meetings. I drafted estate plans for clients who came to me because their lives were complicated and they needed someone who could see 3 moves ahead. I went home to Nell's house at night. I ate dinner at her kitchen table. I slept in the guest bedroom. 4 more weeks passed. On the first Monday in March, I received a phone call from a woman I didn't know. She introduced herself as Denise Park, the hospice nurse who had cared for my grandmother in her final months. I remembered her. I had seen her every Friday for 6 months. I had brought her coffee. She had brought my grandmother applesauce. Denise said, Georgia, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to tell you something. I got a phone call yesterday from your mother. I closed my eyes. I said, what did she want? Denise said, she offered me $15,000 to sign a statement saying that your grandmother was confused in her final months and that you were manipulating her. She said, your grandmother didn't know what she was signing when the lawyer came. I said, what did you say? Denise said, I hung up on her. Then I called my supervisor. Then I called the hospice agency's attorney. Then I got your number from Mr. Holloway. Georgia, I want you to know something. Your grandmother was one of the sharpest women I ever took care of. She knew who you were. She knew who your parents were. She told me on more than one occasion that you were the only one she trusted. And in my 17 years as a hospice nurse, I have never had a family member try to bribe me. I want to give a sworn statement. I want it on the record. I don't know what you're dealing with, but whatever it is, they crossed a line yesterday, and I want to help you. I said, Denise, thank you. She said the hospice agency is also going to refer this to the state attorney general's office. Attempting to bribe a nurse to manipulate a medical record is a crime in South Carolina. I thought you should know that too. I said, thank you. I'll tell my attorney. She said, you tell Mr. Holloway I said hello. And Georgia, your grandmother would be proud of how you're handling this. I didn't say anything for a moment. Something in my chest shifted. I said, thank you, Denise. I hung up. I called Brett. I told him. He listened. He said, Georgia, your mother just committed a felony. Hospice medical record tampering is prosecuted aggressively in this state. I am going to do 3 things. I'm going to file a formal report with the South Carolina Attorney General's office. I'm going to file a report with the State Board of Nursing for Denise's agency's records. And I'm going to write a letter on your behalf to your parents and your sister, stating that any further contact with any person associated with your grandmother's care, your firm, your residence, or you personally will be documented and referred to the appropriate authorities. I said, send it. He said, I'm going to also suggest something, Georgia. Your mother has now escalated 3 times. The porch, the firm, the bribery attempt. She's going to escalate again. She doesn't know how to stop. I want you to be ready for the next one. Whatever it is, it's going to be public. She's going to want to humiliate you in a way she thinks will force your hand. I said, how do I get ready for something I can't predict? He said, be present, be calm, and bring the paperwork. I said, I always bring the paperwork. The next communication from my family came 10 days later. It was, to my surprise, a wedding invitation. Not a wedding, a funeral. Mine. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. Heavy cream cardstock, my mother's handwriting on the outside. Gold foil along the inside of the envelope flap, a detail only my mother would bother with. I opened it at my kitchen counter. I pulled out the program. I read it once, then I read it twice. In loving memory of Georgia Hollis, beloved daughter, beloved sister, 1995 to 2026. The date of my death was listed as the Saturday before, January 31st. The memorial reception would be held at Magnolia Bluff Country Club at 2 o'clock on Saturday, March 28th. Hors d'oeuvres and a cash bar. Formal attire. A note at the bottom said, in lieu of flowers, please consider a donation to the Hollis Family Memorial Fund. There was a Zelle QR code. I set the program down on the counter. I stood there for a full minute. I counted 58 seconds. Then I laughed. Not a sad laugh, a real laugh. The kind you laugh when someone has played a chess move so bad you briefly wonder if they're hustling you. Because I had been handling everything up to this point. I had been the one deciding when to speak, when to stay silent, when to engage. I had been careful. I had been calm. I had been paperwork-minded. But my mother had just done something I could not have asked her to do if I had hired a screenwriter. She had scheduled a public event with a venue, with an RSVP list, with witnesses, in front of which, if I chose to walk in, I could deploy the document. Before I made one more move, I needed to do 3 things. I needed to call Brett, I needed to call Magnolia Bluff Country Club, and I needed to look at my spreadsheet because the country club was in one of the columns. I called Brett first. He picked up on the second ring. I read him the program. There was a long silence. Then he said, "Georgia, listen to me very carefully. You are about to be handed an opportunity that almost no litigant ever receives. Your mother is about to host, with witnesses she has selected and paid for, a public event predicated on a lie. She is inviting a large group of people into a factual situation she has entirely misjudged. Do not attend that event angry. Attend it prepared." I said, "What do I bring?" He said, "Everything. The codicil, the recording of the trust instrument, the capacity evaluations, the letter from the firm, the statement from Denise, which I'll have certified by tomorrow, the affidavit from the hospice agency, the AG referral confirmation, which came back this morning and which I was going to call you about this afternoon. You're going to walk in there with a folder, Georgia, just one folder. You're not going to raise your voice. You're not going to argue. You're going to let them perform. Let them give their speeches. Let them accept donations. Let them read the eulogy. And when your mother asks, because she will ask, what you have to say for yourself, you are going to stand up and you are going to open the folder." I said, "And the country club?" He said, "What about it?" I said, "Brett, Magnolia Bluff Country Club. That's a corporate membership, isn't it?" I heard him exhale. He said, "Georgia, hold on." I heard him shuffling papers. 30 seconds passed. I counted. He came back. He said, "Georgia, the Magnolia Bluff Country Club membership was held in the name of the Hollis Family Trust. Your grandfather bought that membership in 1979. When he died in 2004, the membership transferred to your grandmother. When she executed the codicil in February of last year, the membership moved into the new trust with everything else. The membership is a trust asset." I said, "Which means?" He said, "Which means your parents are using a private venue that belongs to you to host an event designed to humiliate you. Georgia, this is not a legal gray area. This is trespass." I said, "Do they know?" He said, "Of course they don't know. The membership dues have been on auto pay out of your grandmother's old account since before she died. I haven't touched them, neither has your mother. The membership bill probably arrives at your grandmother's house, which is now your house, which you may not have been there long enough to see yet." I said, "It came last Thursday. I filed it." He said, "Good girl." I said, "What do I do?" He said, "Nothing yet. You're going to do one thing this week. You're going to call the club's general manager. You're going to introduce yourself. You're going to explain that you are the trustee of the Hollis Family Trust, which is the record holder of the membership. You're going to ask for a copy of the Hollis Family membership file and the club's policies on private events booked under the membership. You're going to thank him for his time. You're not going to mention your parents." I said, "And then?" He said, "Then we wait. Let them plan the event. Let them pay the deposit. Let them write the program. Let them invite the guests. Let them pay for the catering. We do not intervene. And on Saturday the 28th, you walk in because you, Georgia Hollis, are the member of record. You have every right to be there." I said, Brett, one more question. He said, go. I said, if my parents paid the deposit and the catering bill on that event, what account did they pay from? There was silence. Then Brett said, Georgia, I don't know, but if the answer is what I think it might be, we have a second legal issue, and this one is going to be more serious than the first. I called the Magnolia Bluff Country Club the next morning at 10 o'clock. I spoke to the general manager, a man named Caldwell Beasley, who had been in his position for 19 years. I introduced myself as Georgia Hollis, the trustee of the Hollis Family Trust, the record holder of membership number 847. I told him I had recently inherited fiduciary responsibility over the membership, and I wanted to update the club records and review the membership file. Caldwell was charming and efficient. He invited me to come in the next day. I brought the codicil, the trust instrument, and my driver's license. He made copies. He updated the club records. He apologized for the confusion because, he said, there had been some recent activity on the membership that had not been authorized through the record holder, and he was glad I had come in to sort it out. I said, what recent activity? He said, there is a private event booked for March 28th. It was booked by a woman who identified herself as Patricia Hollis and provided the membership number. Because the membership has a long history at the club, our events coordinator accepted the booking without requesting trustee verification. The deposit was paid by personal check on February 11th. The balance is due 1 week before the event. The total cost is just under $14,000. I said, do you have a copy of the check? Caldwell said, of course. One moment. He came back with a photocopy of a check drawn on a joint account at South State Bank in the names of Richard and Patricia Hollis. The memo line said, Nell Memorial. I said, Caldwell, may I keep this photocopy? He said, it's yours. I said, one more question. If the trustee of record, me, determines that the event has been booked without authorization, what are the club's options? Caldwell said, the trustee of record can cancel the event. The deposit is non-refundable, but that's between the person who paid the deposit and the club. The trustee can also choose to let the event proceed. It's entirely your decision. I said, Caldwell, I want the event to proceed. I want to attend as the trustee of record. Please do not cancel. Please do not notify my parents. Please treat the reservation as I have just confirmed it, and please have the front desk informed that I, Georgia Hollis, will be attending as the trustee of record on the afternoon of March 28th. Caldwell said, Miss Hollis, I have been here 19 years. I knew your grandmother. May I say something off the record? I said, please. He said, your grandmother was a woman who handled her affairs like a woman who had seen some things. I don't know what you're working on, but I'll make sure the club is on the right side of it. I said, thank you, Caldwell. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. I am a tax attorney. Preparation is a thing I understand. I built a binder, not a folder, a full 3-inch black leather binder with tabbed dividers. The binder had 12 tabs. Tab 1, the codicil certified copy. Tab 2, the trust instrument certified copy with the trustee and beneficiary pages flagged. Tab 3, the recording of the trust instrument at the Charleston County Recorder's Office. Tab 4, Dr. Marsh's capacity evaluation of Nell, dated February 4th of the prior year. Tab 5, Dr. Henderson's independent geriatric psychiatric evaluation, dated February 11th of the prior year. Tab 6. Nell's handwritten statement, notarized, explaining in her own words why she wrote the codicil. Tab 7. The certified statement from Denise Park, the hospice nurse. Tab 8. The formal referral from the hospice agency to the South Carolina Attorney General's office, dated the 15th of February. Tab 9. Celia Whitmore's letter on firm letterhead confirming that the allegations against me had been reviewed and found baseless. Tab 10. The Magnolia Bluff Country Club membership file showing the trust as record holder since 1979. Tab 11. The photocopy of the check from Richard and Patricia Hollis paying the deposit for the event. Tab 12. A single sheet of paper with the words cease and desist at the top, drafted by Brett, signed by me, addressed to my father, my mother, and my sister Whitney. I did not rehearse what I would say. I knew what I would say. I would say nothing until my mother invited me to speak, and then I would say exactly enough to end it. I went to work every day. I took my meetings. I filed my briefs. I ate dinner at my grandmother's kitchen table. I slept in the guest bedroom for one more week, and then, on the Sunday before the 28th, I moved my things into Nell's bedroom. I made the bed. I sat on the edge of it. I cried, finally, for about 10 minutes. Then I washed my face and I went to sleep. I want to stop here for a moment. If you have ever had to sit quietly through weeks of your family escalating, knowing the whole time that you held the paperwork that would end it, you know the particular loneliness of that position. People who haven't been through it will tell you to just talk to them or just clear the air. They don't understand that you have already talked. They don't understand that clearing the air would only give your family another chance to reload. Sometimes the only honest thing to do is wait. Let them keep moving. Let them keep overcommitting to a story that has no foundation. Let them book the country club. And if you're in that position right now, if you're sitting on a document, a piece of information, a truth that you know will detonate when you show it, hit that like button. This story is for you. And tell me in the comments, would you have walked into that reception, or would you have sent Brett with a letter and stayed home? I almost sent Brett. I decided not to. Some things you have to do yourself. Saturday the 28th is cool and bright. There is a breeze coming off the harbor, and the dogwoods along the drive to Magnolia Bluff are about to open. I dress carefully. I wear a charcoal gray sheath dress I bought in 2022 for a client meeting with a federal judge. I wear my grandmother's pearls, single strand Mikimoto, a graduation gift when I finished law school. I wear flat black pumps because I intend to walk evenly. I put on the kind of makeup I wear to court: subtle, finished, unreadable. I carry the binder in a leather tote. I carry a second, thinner folder in my hand because I want something visible. In the folder, I have placed one document only, the first 2 pages of the codicil with my grandmother's signature and the notary's seal clearly visible. I drive myself. I arrive at 1:53 p.m. I park in the members' lot. I walk across the white gravel path to the front entrance. My hands are not shaking. I notice this. I also notice the bluebirds in the crepe myrtles along the path, and the smell of boxwood in the late winter sun, and the click of my own heels on the flagstone. The hostess at the front desk looks up. She recognizes me from 2 weeks ago. She stands. She says, "Miss Hollis, welcome. Mr. Beasley asked me to let him know when you arrived. He would like to accompany you in." I say, "Thank you. I'll wait." Caldwell Beasley appears in 30 seconds. He is wearing a navy suit. He shakes my hand. He says, "Miss Hollis, if you'd follow me, please." We walk through the main foyer, through the library with the stuffed heron, down the long hallway lined with photographs of club champions from 1922 to the present, through a set of double doors. The Magnolia Room is a rectangle about 60 feet long. There is a low stage at the far end. There are round tables set for 48, with white linens and centerpieces of lilies and white roses. There is a string quartet playing quietly in the corner. There is a photograph of me, blown up to 3 feet by 4 feet on an easel next to the stage. It is a picture of me at Whitney's first wedding from 2014, in which I am 19 and look tired and startled and unhappy. It is the worst photograph of me that exists. My mother chose it on purpose. There are, I count, 41 people in the room. I recognize about half of them. Aunt Mary Margaret from Greenville. My father's business partner from the insurance firm, Harold, who must be 78 by now. 2 women who were on my mother's garden club executive committee. Whitney's second husband, Drew. Whitney's best friend, Brittany. A man I do not know in a black suit who looks like a funeral director but is not. A pastor I do not recognize. And in the center of it all, at the round table closest to the stage, my mother and my father and my sister Whitney. My mother is wearing black dress, black hat with a small veil, black gloves. She is holding a glass of champagne. She has not yet seen me. Whitney has not yet seen me either. She is laughing at something Brittany is saying. My father has seen me. He is standing at the bar on the left side of the room. He has turned toward the door. He is not moving. Caldwell steps forward. He walks in front of me. He says, in the kind of voice that trained club employees can produce from nowhere, a voice that carries without being loud. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Before the program begins, Miss Hollis, the trustee of record of the Hollis Family Trust and the member to whom this club hosts today, has asked me to announce her arrival." The string quartet stops in the middle of a phrase. 41 people turn toward the door. My mother's champagne flute falls out of her hand. It does not shatter. It lands in the centerpiece of lilies on her table and bounces once and comes to rest on the white linen with its stem pointing at the ceiling. I walk in. I walk to an empty chair at a table near the back. I pull out the chair. I sit down. I set my tote on the floor and the thin folder on my lap. I smile at Caldwell. I nod. Caldwell says, "Please enjoy your afternoon. If you need anything, I'll be nearby." He leaves. My mother recovers first. She stands up. The pastor has already walked toward the stage. My father has not moved from the bar. Whitney is staring at me with her mouth open. My mother says, in a voice that is trying to be gracious and is not quite succeeding, "Georgia, we are so glad you decided to come. I know this must be difficult for you. We weren't sure you would be able to join us." She has not yet understood. She thinks I am here for reconciliation. I say nothing. I fold my hands in my lap. Aunt Mary Margaret from Greenville says, loud enough for the room to hear, Patricia, is Georgia dead or isn't she? My mother's composure flickers. She recovers. She turns to Aunt Mary Margaret and says, it's symbolic, Mary Margaret. You know Georgia and I have had our difficulties. This is a ritual of release, a way to let go of the daughter we lost. Aunt Mary Margaret says, but she's sitting right there. My mother says, yes, Mary Margaret, she is. Aunt Mary Margaret says, then why is there cake? I do not laugh. I do not smile. I sit very still. I count. 13 seconds. My mother turns to the pastor. She says, Reverend Ashworth, I think we should proceed with the program. Reverend Ashworth, I do not know this man. I have never met him. He is wearing a black clerical shirt and a silver cross, says, of course, Patricia. He walks to the stage. He stands behind the small lectern. He taps the microphone. He says, family and friends, we gather today to mourn the loss of a daughter and a sister, to remember who she was to us, and to release, with love, the one who has walked away. Several people are now openly staring at me. I do not return their stares. I watch Reverend Ashworth. He opens a printed document. He reads a eulogy. It is not a eulogy. It is a list of grievances my mother has accumulated against me for 28 years, rewritten in the voice of loss. He reads that I was a difficult child, that I refused my mother's guidance, that I became cold and distant in adulthood, that I isolated my grandmother in her final months, that I took advantage of an elderly woman's affection to elevate myself above my own flesh and blood, that today the Hollis family is gathered to mourn a daughter who chose, by her actions, to die to her family. He uses the phrase died to the family 4 times. He reads for 11 minutes. I time him. I am still sitting in the back. My father has finally left the bar and has sat down at my mother's table. He is not looking at me. He is looking at his hands. When Reverend Ashworth is finished, my mother stands up. She walks to the stage. She takes the microphone. She says, "Thank you, Reverend. I'd like to share a few words of my own." My mother's speech lasts 14 minutes. I time this one too. In her speech, she does several things. She describes the difficult daughter I was. She describes the sacrifices she made for me. She describes how Grandma Nell was confused in her final months and said things she could not possibly have meant. She describes how she and my father and Whitney have decided, as a family, she says this phrase twice, to begin a conversation with the estate to correct what they believe was a misunderstanding in the final paperwork. She pauses. She looks at me. She says, "We want Georgia to know that the door is always open. We are prepared to forgive. We are prepared to welcome her back into this family once she has made things right." She raises her glass. She says, "To family." Whitney raises her glass. My father raises his. About a third of the room raises theirs. Aunt Mary Margaret is not one of them. My mother sets her glass down. She looks directly at me. She says, "Georgia, is there anything you would like to say?" I stand up. I do not walk to the stage. I walk to the center of the room, between the tables, where everyone can see me. I carry the thin folder. The black leather binder stays in the tote at my chair. I say thank you. I would like to say a few things. The room is silent. Even the quartet in the corner has stopped pretending to play. I say, before I begin, I want to clarify something about this venue. The Magnolia Bluff Country Club is a private club. Membership is held by a specific entity, and that entity determines who may host events under the membership's privileges. The membership of record for the Hollis family has been held since 1979 in a trust. That trust is now the Eleanor Margaret Hollis Revocable Living Trust, which became irrevocable upon my grandmother's death on January 9th of this year. I open the folder. I take out the first page. I hold it up so the room can see the heading. I say, this is the first page of the codicil to my grandmother's will, executed on February 22nd of last year, 11 months before her death, in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary. After 2 independent capacity evaluations, one by her internist and one by a board-certified geriatric psychiatrist. The codicil transferred the entire Hollis family estate, including the principal residence, the lake property, the brokerage accounts, and the country club membership, into an irrevocable trust. The trustee of that trust is named on page 4, line 12. I pause. I say, that is my name. I hold up the second page so the room can see. I say, the sole beneficiary is named on page 4, line 14. That is also my name. My parents and my sister are not beneficiaries. They are not named in any capacity. The codicil has been recorded at the Charleston County Recorder's Office since January 13th. It has been reviewed by the senior partner of Whitmore and Price, where I am a senior associate on partner track. It has been reviewed by the general manager of this club, whose records were updated accordingly 2 weeks ago. My mother is now standing very still. Her face has lost its color. My father is looking at me for the first time since I walked in. I say, which means, as a point of fact, that this event, which was booked in the name of my mother, using a membership number that has not been in my mother's name since my grandfather's death in 2004, was booked without the authorization of the trustee of record. The deposit, paid by personal check on the 11th of February, was accepted in good faith by the club's events coordinator. The balance has been paid out of my parents' joint account. That balance amount was $14,100. My parents do not have the authority to book events on this membership. They never have. Whitney says, "What are you saying?" I say, "I'm saying that this event is being held on club property, on my membership, without my consent, for the purpose of publicly declaring me dead to the family in order to support a false narrative that has already been used to solicit donations. There is a Zelle QR code on the back of this program. Donors are contributing to something called the Hollis Family Memorial Fund. I have confirmed with 2 attorneys, including the South Carolina Attorney General's office, that no such fund is registered with the state." I pause. I say, which makes every dollar contributed to that QR code a solicitation under false pretenses. There is a sound in the room that I can only describe as a collective intake of breath. My mother says, "Georgia, this is not the time or the place." I say, "Mother, this is the place you chose." I open the folder again. I take out a second document. It is a single sheet of paper. I hold it up. I say, "This is a cease and desist letter. It is addressed to my father, my mother, and my sister. It is signed and dated. I am serving it to you now in the presence of witnesses, so that there can be no question about when notice was provided." It enumerates 5 specific behaviors. 1. Any further contact with any person employed by the hospice agency that cared for my grandmother, including a documented attempted bribery of Denise Park on March the 2nd of this year for the purpose of manipulating a medical record, which is a felony in South Carolina and has been referred to the Attorney General. 2. Any further contact with the law firm of Whitmore and Price for any purpose related to my professional conduct. 3. Any contact with the Hollis Family Trust's attorney other than through my own attorney of record, Brett Holloway. 4. Any presence on trust property, including the principal residence at 418 Live Oak Road in Somerville. 5. Any further use of the Hollis Family Country Club membership. I walk to my mother's table. I lay the cease and desist on the white linen in front of her. She does not touch it. I say, "One more thing. The membership dues for this club are paid out of the trust, not out of your account. You do not have authority to host events here. I have confirmed this with the general manager. Future bookings on this membership will require my written authorization. You should not attempt to use this membership again." I turn to the room. I say, "To everyone who came here today believing you were attending a memorial, I apologize. My mother issued invitations to a memorial for a daughter who is not deceased, for a purpose that was at minimum a misrepresentation and at worst a solicitation of fraudulent donations. Anyone who contributed to the Hollis Family Memorial Fund through the QR code on the back of this program should request an immediate refund. The account behind that QR code is a personal account in my mother's name." Harold, my father's old business partner, says from his table, "Patricia, is that true?" My mother does not answer. Aunt Mary Margaret from Greenville stands up. She says, "Patricia, did you solicit donations for a funeral fund for a woman who isn't dead?" My mother says, "Mary Margaret, you don't understand the situation." Aunt Mary Margaret says, "I understand it now." She picks up her handbag. She picks up her husband's elbow. She walks out of the room. 6 other guests stand up within the next 2 minutes. None of them say anything. They leave their lilies on the tables. Caldwell Beasley has returned to the room. He is standing at the back, near where I was sitting. He is holding a second, smaller folder. He walks to the front of the room. He says in his professional voice, "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Caldwell Beasley, General Manager of Magnolia Bluff. On behalf of the club, I regret any confusion that has arisen regarding today's event. The club records will confirm that the Hollis Family Trust, with Miss Georgia Hollis as trustee, is the legitimate holder of the membership. The club will be working with Miss Hollis in the coming days to review how this booking was accepted. The event is now concluded. Staff will be making the room available for departure. Refreshments will be made available in the foyer for those who would like to stay briefly. Thank you all for coming." He nods to the quartet. The quartet does not resume. I turn back to my mother. She is still standing. She has not picked up the cease and desist. She says, in a voice that is much quieter than her earlier voice. "Georgia, please, can we talk about this?" I say, "I have been available to talk for 55 days. Brett Holloway's office phone has been answered every business day. You chose not to call." She says, "This is my mother-in-law's estate." I say, "It was. It's been mine since January 9th. It was going to be mine for 11 months before that. She knew what she wanted." She says, "Georgia, you're my daughter." I say, "According to the program you mailed to 87 people, I am not." I walk back to my table. I pick up my tote. I walk to the door. Caldwell opens it for me. In the foyer, 3 people are waiting. Aunt Mary Margaret, Harold, my father's old business partner, and a woman I vaguely recognize as my grandmother's longtime bridge partner, Eleanor Royce. All 3 of them are standing together like they have been deputized. Aunt Mary Margaret says, "Georgia, your grandmother would be proud of how you handled that. I was there when Nell told my mother about the codicil 3 summers ago. She told my mother, and she told Eleanor here, and she told Denise. She was not confused. She knew exactly what she was doing. If anyone asks me, and I expect they will, I'll say so." Eleanor Royce says, "Me too." Harold says, "Me too, for what it's worth. Your daddy and I have been friends for 41 years, and I love him like a brother, but he has lost his mind over money that was never his in the first place." I say, "Thank you, all 3 of you." Aunt Mary Margaret says, "Georgia, come to Greenville sometime. Nell wanted me to tell you that. I couldn't tell you before because I didn't have your current address. She wrote it in a letter to me 2 weeks before she died. She said you would need to know someone in your family had her head on straight. That's me. I'm the one." I do not cry in front of them. I will cry later. I walk out to my car. I drive home to my grandmother's house. I sit at her kitchen table. I set the binder on the table. I pour a glass of water. Then I cry for about 20 minutes. Then I call Brett. The cascade begins Monday morning and does not stop for 6 weeks. On Monday at 9 a.m., the Charleston County Recorder's Office logs a notice that the Hollis Family Trust, through its trustee, has placed a lis pendens on the property at 418 Live Oak Road, a precaution Brett files because, as he puts it, your father may still be under the impression that he has a legal interest in that house. This makes sure any buyer, any lender, any appraiser who pulls the file sees you first. The filing also clouds any attempt to record a competing claim. On Monday at 10:30, the South Carolina Attorney General's Office sends formal notification to my parents that they are under investigation for attempted bribery of a licensed hospice nurse under SC Code 44-63-161, which is a felony. The notification is delivered to their house by certified mail and a sheriff's deputy. The deputy also serves a subpoena for their banking records from South State Bank, covering the period from December through March. On Tuesday at 1 p.m., South State Bank, which has been notified by both the Attorney General's subpoena and my own attorney's letter, freezes the joint account held by Richard and Patricia Hollis, pending the investigation. The account contained approximately $11,400. Their mortgage auto payment bounces on Wednesday morning. On Wednesday at 3 p.m., Wells Fargo, which holds a home equity line of credit on my parents' house in Mount Pleasant that they had drawn against in December for approximately $80,000, apparently to pay for the funeral, and, I would later learn, for legal retainers with two different Charleston attorneys who had both declined to take the case, calls the loan due. My parents have 30 days to refinance, or the bank will begin foreclosure proceedings. On Thursday, the Magnolia Bluff Country Club, following a unanimous vote of its executive committee, suspends Richard and Patricia Hollis from all guest privileges pending review. They have not been members in their own name in over 20 years, but they have used the Hollis membership as guests. That privilege is now revoked. Caldwell Beasley personally calls me to inform me. He also tells me that the club has refunded the $14,000 for the event to my parents' frozen account, where it is now also frozen. On Friday, Reverend Ashworth, who, it turns out, is not a reverend, but is a former insurance salesman who occasionally performs ceremonies for hire under a non-denominational online ordination, sends me a handwritten letter of apology through Brett. He claims he did not know the nature of the event. He asked me not to pursue him. Brett and I decide we do not need to. The following Monday, Whitney's husband Drew shows up at Brett's office without an appointment. He tells the receptionist he needs to give Brett a message. The message, relayed to me that evening, is that Drew has filed for divorce from Whitney and is seeking an emergency restraining order against my parents to keep them away from his and Whitney's 2-year-old son. He does not want to be associated with the pending fraud investigation. I feel nothing about this. I do nothing about it either. My mother calls me 3 times over the next 2 weeks. I let all 3 go to voicemail. She does not leave messages. The 4th call, she leaves a message that is 40 seconds long. She asks if I will meet her for coffee. She says she is sorry. She says she did not understand. She says she is in therapy. She says she wants to try to rebuild. I listen to the message once. I save it. I forward it to Brett without comment. My father never calls. Whitney calls once. Her message is 17 seconds long. She says, "Georgia, I know you're not going to call me back. I wanted you to know I told Mom she was crazy from the start. I was going along with it. I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. Drew is leaving me. I don't know what I'm going to do. I hope you're happy." I do not feel vindicated by her message. I do not feel anything really. I save it too. I file it. Aunt Mary Margaret calls every Sunday evening at 7. She tells me about Greenville. She tells me about now. She tells me stories I had never heard from before I was born about my grandmother in her 30s, which is the age I am now. Nell, it turns out, had made her own share of ruthless decisions in her 30s. She had disinherited her own brother over a small business he had mismanaged into the ground, while pretending to be mismanaging it. It had taken her 11 years to stop being angry about it. She had still, as far as Aunt Mary Margaret could tell, not forgiven him when he died. Mary Margaret said she thought my grandmother had seen something of herself in me, not the anger, the willingness to act. I listened. I took notes, because I am a lawyer and that is what I do. 6 months later, I am sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table, which is now my kitchen table. The house at 418 Live Oak Road is in my name. The lake property has been leased to a family friend for a modest annual rent that covers the property tax. The country club membership is in my name, and I have been sponsored for my own full membership, separate from the trust, by Caldwell Beasley and Aunt Mary Margaret. I have made partner at Whitmore and Price. The announcement came in May, earlier than expected, after Celia Whitmore told the partnership that what she had watched me handle over the spring had been more impressive than anything she had seen a junior lawyer do in her entire career. Her words, not mine. My parents' house in Mount Pleasant is on the market. Their attempt to refinance the HELOC failed. The mortgage is being assumed by a young couple whose agent contacted me last month through Brett because they had noticed my list pendants on the other property and wanted to confirm there was no encumbrance I knew about on this one. There wasn't. I let the sale go through without comment. My parents have moved into a rental apartment in West Ashley. The Attorney General's investigation is ongoing. Brett tells me a plea is likely. He tells me my mother will probably not serve time, but will probably be barred from serving on non-profit boards, which he says will be, for my mother, the harshest sentence available under South Carolina law. Whitney moved to Atlanta. I have not spoken with her. Drew has full custody of their son. The Hollis Family Memorial Fund Zelle account collected $2,300. It has been refunded to the donors, by me, through Brett, with a letter of explanation. Most of the donors sent thank you notes. 2 of them sent follow-up donations to the Medical University of South Carolina's Pancreatic Cancer Research Program in Nell's memory, which is where I had suggested in the letter that any sincere donors could redirect their contributions. The hospital sent me a framed letter of thanks. I hung it in the front hallway of Nell's house, next to her wedding photograph from 1961. I do not see my parents. I see Aunt Mary Margaret every 6 weeks. I see Eleanor Royce at Bridge on Thursdays because she asked me to join her regular foursome after her previous fourth died. I see Brett for coffee once a month because he is, at this point, more of a friend than an attorney, though I keep him on retainer anyway. I see Caldwell Beasley at the club when I play tennis on Saturdays. I have not invited my parents to the club. I will not. I was not rescued by anyone. I did not need to be. My grandmother saw what was coming years before it came. She made the instrument that would end it. She put my name on every signature line. She did not tell me what she had done because she knew that if I knew, I would carry the weight of it for 11 months, and she wanted me to have those 11 months of Fridays without a document between us. She made the tool. I used it. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. I want to tell you the thing I wish someone had told me earlier. Your family does not get to write your obituary while you are still breathing. If they try, you do not have to show up. But if you do show up with paperwork, because funerals are for the dead, and as far as I know, you are still among the living. Boundaries aren't walls, they're documents. And the quiet ones, the ones on cream cardstock with a notary seal and a filing date at the county recorder's office, those are the ones that hold. If this story resonated with you, if there is someone in your life right now who has tried to write you out of the family ledger before you were ready to be written out, tell me in the comments. Would you have walked into that reception? Or would you have sent your lawyer with the letter? I read every comment. Your answer tells me what story to tell next. Subscribe if you haven't. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are the quiet professional in your family who has been underestimated for 20 years, keep going. The paperwork is worth more than the performance. I'm Georgia Hollis. I'm 31 years old. I'm a tax attorney in Charleston, South Carolina. I am still alive. And I am still the trustee of record.